The November wind howled across the Montana plains like the cries of lost spirits. But Kaya Silverbear moved through the darkness with the silent grace of her wolf companions, her small feet finding purchase on rocks and roots that would have tripped a less experienced traveler. At 14, she had been running for 8 months, ever since the soldiers had destroyed her Apache village and taken her people to the reservation, to territories away. She should have been on that train with the others, should have submitted to the fate that the government had decided for her people. But when the chaos of the forced relocation began, when families were separated and children torn from grandparents' arms, Kaya had made a choice that would define the rest of her life. She had run. The wolf pack had found her on her 3rd night of freedom, collapsed by a stream with fever burning through her small body and despair threatening to claim her spirit. Instead of seeing her as prey, the alpha magnificent gray male with intelligent amber eyes had recognized something in her that transcended species. Perhaps it was her loneliness that called to theirs, or perhaps it was something deeper, more primal, that recognized a kindred soul in exile. For 8 months, she had lived as they lived, learned their language of subtle movements and meaningful glances, shared their kills and their wanderings across the vast wilderness. The pack had become her family, the only family she had left, and they had taught her secrets that no human school ever could. How to read the wind for danger, how to find water in the driest places, how to become invisible when survival depended on it. But as winter approached with promises of snow and scarcity, Kaya knew that her time with the wolves was drawing to a close. The pack would need to range farther for food, and the harsh cold that her wolf family could survive would be deadly to her human body, no matter how adapted she had become to life in the wild. Tonight, as she moved through the darkness with 3 of her packmates trailing silently behind her, Kaya was scouting the valley where smoke from a human dwelling had caught her attention that afternoon. She had avoided human settlements for months, knowing that discovery would mean capture, and capture would mean the end of her freedom. But her moccasins were wearing thin. Her dress was little more than tatters held together by rabbit sinew, and her body was already beginning to feel the bite of approaching winter. The cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by tall pines, a modest but well-built structure with golden light bleeding through the windows and smoke rising steadily from the chimney. From her position in the tree line, Kaya could see a corral with several horses, a barn that suggested prosperity without excess, and most importantly, signs that only one person lived here. No children's voices carried on the wind, no woman's laughter echoed from the house, no evidence of a family that might see her as a threat to their safety. The wolves pressed closer to her, their warm bodies providing comfort as she studied the dwelling that represented everything she had been running from: human civilization, rules and boundaries, the structured life that had been torn away from her when the soldiers came. The man emerged from the cabin as if summoned by her thoughts, and Kaya's breath caught in her throat. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that caught the light from his doorway and movements that spoke of strength held in careful control. Most importantly, he moved with an awareness of his surroundings that reminded her of the wolves, alert, cautious, respectful of the darkness around him. Nathan Cross stood on his porch, something indefinable prickling at his senses as he scanned the tree line surrounding his property. At 35, he had lived alone on this remote ranch for 7 years, ever since his wife and infant son had died in a diphtheria outbreak that had claimed half the county. He had chosen isolation deliberately, building his home far from the nearest town, far from reminders of the life he had lost and the community that had failed to save the people he loved most. But tonight, something was different. The horses were restless in their corral, shifting and snorting with an unease that spoke of predators nearby. Yet Nathan's experienced eye could see no signs of the usual threats. No mountain cat tracks in the soft earth, no evidence of bears preparing for winter sleep. Whatever was making his animals nervous was something else entirely. As he stepped off the porch to check the barn, Nathan's peripheral vision caught movement at the edge of the clearing. For just a moment, he glimpsed what looked like a child's silhouette against the trees, small and still, watching him with the intensity of a wild creature deciding whether to flee or fight. But when he turned his head directly toward the spot, nothing was there except pine boughs swaying in the wind. Kaya pressed herself deeper into the shadows, her heart pounding as she realized the human had detected her presence. The wolves beside her had gone completely still, their instincts warning them that discovery meant danger, but they stayed with her, loyal to the bond they had forged through months of shared survival. The man Nathan, she had heard one of the traders call him, when she had observed from a distance weeks ago, continued his circuit of the property, checking his animals and securing anything that the wind might claim. But Kaya noticed that he left his cabin door standing slightly ajar, warm light spilling out into the cold November night like an invitation, or perhaps like a trap. For 3 hours, Kaya watched and waited, studying Nathan's routines and trying to gauge his intentions. The wolves had settled into patient observation, understanding that their human pack mate was making decisions that would affect them all. When Nathan finally retired for the night, he did something that made Kaya's empty stomach clench with longing. He left a plate of food on his porch steps, along with a thick wool blanket. The gesture was subtle, easily explained away as feeding wild animals if questioned. But Kaya's instincts told her it was meant for her. Somehow, the solitary man had not only detected her presence, but recognized her need and chosen to respond. With kindness rather than alarm, still, she waited. Survival had taught her patience, and 8 months with the wolves had honed her natural caution to a razor's edge. It wasn't until the cabin had been dark for over an hour that she finally crept from the tree line, moving with the fluid silence that had become second nature. The food was simple but nourishing: cornbread with honey, strips of dried venison, and a tin cup of milk that was still warm from the cow. Kaya devoured it with the desperate hunger of someone who had been surviving on whatever the pack could share and whatever she could forage. The blanket was thick and well made, large enough to wrap around her twice and soft enough to remind her of the buffalo robes from her childhood. As she sat on the porch steps, wrapped in warmth and feeling truly full for the first time in weeks, Kaya studied the door that Nathan had left slightly open. The symbolism wasn't lost on her, a barrier that was almost, but not quite closed. An invitation that could be accepted or declined without shame on either side. The 3 wolves who had accompanied her emerged from the tree line, drawn by her relaxation and the absence of immediate threat. They approached the porch cautiously, their wild instincts warring with their loyalty to Kaya. The largest of them, a female with distinctive white markings around her eyes, came close enough to touch Kaya's hand with her nose in a gesture of affection and concern. "I know, Moonface," Kaya whispered in Apache, using the name she had given the wolf months ago. "I know you're worried, but maybe it's time to take a different kind of risk." Inside the cabin, Nathan lay awake listening to the soft sounds. From his porch, he had been taking risks all evening, starting with leaving the food and blanket outside. His rational mind told him he was being foolish, that encouraging wild animals near his home was dangerous and irresponsible. But his heart recognized something in that brief glimpse of the childlike figure that called to his own experience of loss and isolation. Tomorrow, he told himself, he would continue his careful balancing act between offering help and respecting boundaries. He would leave the door slightly open once more, along with food and whatever small comforts he could provide. And perhaps, if the mysterious visitor was what he suspected, a lost child rather than a wild animal, they would find the courage to accept the sanctuary he was offering outside. Kaya finished the last of the milk and carefully gathered the empty plate and cup, stacking them neatly beside the door as a sign of gratitude and respect. Then, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders like armor against both cold and doubt, she retreated to the tree line where her wolf family waited. But instead of disappearing into the deep forest as she had every other night for months, Kaya settled at the edge of the clearing where she could see the cabin door. The wolves arranged themselves around her in a protective circle, their warm bodies creating a living shelter against the wind. For the first time since beginning her long flight from human civilization, Kaya fell asleep within sight of a home. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories from the Old West. Kaya has taken her first tentative step toward trusting a human again. But will Nathan's patient kindness be enough to bridge the gap between civilization and the wild? Find out what happens when two lost souls discover they might not have to face the world alone. 3 weeks had passed since Nathan Cross first left food on his porch, and what had begun as a single act of compassion had evolved into something neither he nor Kaya could have anticipated. Every night, the mysterious visitor returned, accepting his offerings with the careful gratitude of a wild creature learning to trust, and every morning, Nathan found small tokens of appreciation in return: a handful of pine nuts, arranged in a perfect circle, eagle feathers placed precisely beside his door, once even a rabbit hide tanned with such skill that it spoke of traditional knowledge, passed down through generations. Nathan had begun to understand that his nocturnal visitor was not merely surviving in the wilderness, she was thriving with knowledge and skills that few humans possessed. The evidence suggested an Apache child, probably a girl based on the delicate size of the moccasin prints he occasionally found in the soft earth near his porch. But more than that, she was someone who moved with the confidence of the truly wild, someone who had found family among creatures that most humans feared. He had seen the wolves. On clear nights when the moon was bright, Nathan could make out shapes at the edge of his clearing, large, intelligent forms that watched his cabin with the protective intensity of guardians. Far from being alarmed, Nathan found himself honored by their presence. It took a special kind of person to earn the trust and protection of wild wolves, and he began to suspect that his mysterious visitor was far more remarkable than he had initially imagined. Kaya, for her part, had developed a routine that satisfied both her need for caution and her growing curiosity about the kind man who showed such patience and respect. She would arrive after full darkness, always accompanied by at least 2 of her wolf family, and spend several hours in the clearing around Nathan's cabin. At first, she had simply taken the food and retreated immediately, but gradually she had begun to explore. She studied his garden, noting which plants he grew and how he cared for them. She observed his animals, learning their personalities and understanding how gently he treated them. Most importantly, she watched Nathan himself through the windows, seeing how he moved through his home with the quiet contentment of someone who had found peace with solitude. Tonight was different, though. The first real snowfall of winter had begun that afternoon, and by evening the world was transformed into a crystalline landscape that was beautiful, but dangerous for someone without proper shelter. Kaya's wolf family pressed closer to her as they made their way to the clearing, their concern evident in the way they kept nudging her toward the warm light that beckoned from Nathan's windows. Nathan had left more than food tonight. Along with the usual plate of nourishing fare, he had placed a pair of warm woolen socks, a wear-upon hat that looked handmade, and most significantly, a small piece of paper weighted down with a stone. Kaya approached the offerings with her usual caution, but when she saw the paper, her heart began to race. Very few humans in her experience could write, and even fewer would take the risk of leaving a written message for someone they had never formally met. With trembling fingers, she lifted the paper and moved closer to the light spilling from the cabin door. The message was written in careful block letters. If you are cold, the door is open. If you are afraid, I understand. If you need help, I am here. No questions, no demands, just warmth and safety for as long as you need it. Nathan. Kaya read the words 3 times, her mind struggling to process the magnitude of what was being offered. Shelter, safety, warmth, all the things she had been missing for 8 months, offered freely by a stranger who had never even seen her face clearly. But trust, she had learned, was the most dangerous luxury a fugitive could afford. The wolves sensed her emotional turmoil and pressed closer, offering the comfort of their warm bodies and their unconditional loyalty. Moonface, the female who had become particularly attached to Kaya, whined softly and nudged her toward the cabin door with gentle insistence. You think I should trust him? Kaya whispered in Apache, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. You think he's safe? As if in response, the largest male of the group, the one Kaya called Stormwalker, rose and padded deliberately toward the cabin door. Instead of the aggressive posture they showed toward threats, his body language was relaxed. curious, even approving. Nathan, who had been pretending to read by his fireplace while actually listening intently for any sounds, from his porch heard the soft scratch of claws on wood. Moving slowly to avoid startling his visitors, he approached the door and peered through the crack he had left open. What he saw took his breath away. A magnificent gray wolf stood on his porch, easily the largest wild wolf Nathan had ever encountered, studying the open door with intelligent amber eyes. But more remarkable still was the small figure behind the wolf, a young Apache girl, wrapped in a blanket he had given her weeks ago, her dark eyes wide with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. For a long moment, human and child simply looked at each other across the threshold that separated the wild from the civilized world. Nathan could see the girl's exhaustion, the way her too thin frame shook with more than just cold, the careful way she positioned herself so that she could flee at the first sign of danger. "Hello," Nathan said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm Nathan." "Kaya," she replied after a moment, her English accented but clear. "I am Kaya Silverbear." "That's a beautiful name," Nathan said, meaning it. "Are you cold, Kaya?" She nodded, and Nathan could see the internal struggle playing out across her young face. 8 months of hiding had taught her that humans meant danger, but 8 months of surviving had also taught her when she had reached the limits of her endurance. "Would you like to come inside? You and your friends are welcome." Kaya's eyes widened with surprise. You would let the wolves in? Your house? They're your family," Nathan said simply. "And families stay together." It was, Kaya realized later, the perfect thing to say. This human understood that the wolves weren't pets or tamed animals, but her chosen pack, her protectors, her kinmen, every way that mattered. The fact that he would welcome them into his home spoke to a level of respect and understanding that she had never expected to find in the civilized world. Slowly, carefully, Kaya stepped across the threshold into Nathan's cabin. Storm Walker followed immediately, his massive form filling the doorway before he moved aside to allow Moonface and the third wolf, a young male Kaya called Swift River, to enter as well. The interior of the cabin was warm and welcoming, with handmade furniture that spoke of craftsmanship and care. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and the smell of bread and stew filled the air with promises of comfort and nourishment. "Are you hungry?" Nathan asked, already moving toward the stove where a pot of venison stew had been simmering. "Always," Kaya admitted, then caught herself. Such honesty could be dangerous, could reveal too much about her desperation and vulnerability. But Nathan simply smiled, an expression so warm and genuine that it made Kaya's chest tighten with unfamiliar emotion. "Then let's fix that right now." As Nathan ladled stew into a bowl and cut thick slices of fresh bread, Kaya remained near the door, every muscle in her body coiled for flight. The wolves had spread out across the cabin with the casual confidence of apex predators, but even they remained alert, ready to protect their human packmate if necessary. "The stew is made with herbs my wife used to grow," Nathan said conversationally as he set the food on his table. "She had a gift for healing, and she taught me which plants could help when someone was run down or had been living rough." Kaya approached the table cautiously, noting that Nathan had positioned himself across the room, giving her space and an easy escape route. The consideration was not lost on her, and she felt some of her tension begin to ease. The stew was the best thing she had tasted since leaving her village, rich with meat and vegetables and seasoned with care. As she ate, Nathan continued talking in a low, soothing voice, sharing stories about his ranch, his animals, and the small details of his solitary life that painted a picture of a man who had found contentment in simplicity. "How long have you been alone?" Kaya asked suddenly, the question emerging before she could stop herself. 7 years, Nathan replied honestly. "My wife and son died of sickness when the boy was just a baby. I came here to get away from reminders, I suppose. I'm sorry for your loss." Kaya said formally, the phrase one she had learned from her grandmother for occasions when words felt inadequate in the face of grief. "Thank you." "How long have you been running?" Kaya stiffened, her instinct screaming warnings about revealing too much information. But something in Nathan's tone, sadness rather than curiosity, understanding rather than judgment, made her answer honestly. 8 months since they took my people to the reservation. Nathan nodded slowly, and Kaya could see in his eyes that he understood the magnitude of what that simple statement contained: loss, displacement, the forced separation from everything that had made her world meaningful. "That's a long time to be alone," he said gently. "I'm not alone," Kaya replied, gesturing toward the wolves who had settled near the fireplace like domestic dogs. "They are my family now." "Yes," Nathan agreed, studying the magnificent animals with respect rather than fear. "I can see that they love you very much." As the evening progressed, Kaya found herself relaxing in ways she hadn't experienced since her childhood. Nathan asked no probing questions about her past or her plans, made no attempts to convince her to abandon her chosen life, and treated her wolves with the same casual respect he might show any honored guests. When exhaustion finally began to claim her, Nathan offered her his own bed while he made a pallet near the fire. But Kaya chose instead to curl up with her wolf family on the thick rug before the hearth. As she drifted off to sleep, surrounded by the warmth of the fire and the protective presence of her pack, Kaya felt something she had almost forgotten existed: safety. Subscribe to our channel to see how this unlikely family continues to grow. Kaya has taken her biggest leap of faith yet, but will Nathan's kindness be enough to heal the wounds left by months of running? And what challenges await when the outside world discovers this unique household? Don't miss the next chapter. Winter had settled over Nathan's ranch with the kind of bone-deep cold that made survival a daily challenge. But inside his cabin, an extraordinary family had found its rhythm. For 2 months, Kaya had divided her time between the warm safety of Nathan's home and the wild freedom of the forest with her wolf pack, gradually learning that she didn't have to choose between civilization and the wild. She could honor both parts of herself. Nathan had proven to be more than just a rescuer. He had become something Kaya hadn't dared hope for: a true father figure who respected her unique path rather than trying to change it. He had taught her to read and write with greater fluency, shared his knowledge of ranching and farming, and most importantly, had learned from her the ancient Apache wisdom about living in harmony with the natural world. The wolves had become as much a part of the household as Kaya herself. Stormwalker often accompanied Nathan on his morning rounds, the massive wolf's presence serving as both protection and companionship. Moonface had appointed herself Kaya's personal guardian, rarely leaving the girl's side whether they were in the cabin or ranging through the forest. Swift River, the youngest of the three, had developed a particular fondness for the warmth of the cabin's hearth, and could often be found sleeping by the fire like an oversized dog. But their peaceful existence was about to face its greatest test: riders. Coming up the valley, Nathan observed from the cabin window one gray February morning, his voice carefully neutral, but his body language alert. 4 of them, and they're wearing badges. Kaya felt her blood turn to ice water. She had always known this day might come, had prepared for it in her mind countless times. But the reality of facing capture still hit her like a physical blow. "Should I run?" "That's your choice," Nathan said, turning to face her with steady eyes. "But you should know that you'll always have a home here, no matter what anyone else says." The wolves sensed the tension immediately, rising from their resting places and positioning themselves protectively round Kaya. Their lips were pulled back in silent snarls, and their eyes had taken on the dangerous gleam that spoke of predators, ready to defend their pack at any cost. The riders were led by Marshal William Hayes, a man Nathan recognized from previous dealings: honest, fair-minded, but bound by duty to enforce federal law. Behind him rode Agent Crawford from the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the same man who had tried to remove Ayanna Sullivan months earlier, along with 2 federal deputies. "Mr. Cross," Marshal Hayes called as he dismounted, his hand resting casually on his gun, but his posture suggesting he hoped to handle the situation peacefully. "We've had reports of an Apache child living on your property, a runaway from the reservation." "I have a daughter living with me," Nathan replied calmly, stepping onto his porch with Kaya beside him. "Her name is Kaya, and she's under my protection, Agent." Crawford's eyes lit with recognition and triumph. "That's her. Kaya Silverbear, reported missing from the forced relocation last spring. She's a ward of the federal government and belongs on the reservation with her people. Her people are here, Nathan said firmly, and Kaya felt a surge of warmth at his immediate, unqualified support. She's my adopted daughter, and this is her home. You have no legal authority to adopt an Indian child, Crawford snapped. The law is clear on this matter. Then the law is wrong, Nathan replied, his voice taking on an edge that Kaya had never heard before. This child has been living wild for 8 months because she was torn away from everything she knew and loved. She's found safety and family here, and I won't let anyone destroy that. Marshal Hayes looked uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. Mr. Cross, I understand your feelings, but Agent Crawford has federal authority here. If the girl is indeed Kaya Silverbear, I am Kaya Silverbear, Kaya interrupted, stepping forward with her chin raised in defiance. And I am also Kaya Cross. Now, this man is my father by choice, just as my wolves are my family by choice. I will not go to your reservation to be stripped of everything that makes me who I am. Agent Crawford's face hardened. You don't have a choice in the matter, girl. You're coming with us, and those dangerous animals will be destroyed for the safety of the community. The mention of harming her wolves triggered something primal in Kaya. Before anyone could react, she let out a piercing whistle that could have been mistaken for a bird call to untrained ears. The response was immediate and overwhelming. From the forest surrounding the clearing emerged not just Kaya's 3 constant companions, but the entire wolf pack, 12 magnificent predators. Moving with the silent coordination of a military unit, they ranged themselves in a semicircle round the mounted federal agents. Their message clear: any threat to Kaya would be met with lethal force. Jesus Christ, whispered one of the deputies, his hand moving toward his weapon before Marshal Hayes gestured for him to remain still. Call them off, Crawford demanded, his voice higher than before despite his attempts to maintain authority. They're not mine to call off, Kaya replied with perfect honesty. They're here because they choose to be, just like I choose to be here with Nathan. Nathan stepped closer to Kaya, his presence solid and reassuring. Marshal Hayes, I know you're a reasonable man. Look at this child, really look at her. Does she seem abused, neglected, unhappy? She's learned more in 2 months here than she would in years at a government school that would try to destroy her culture and identity. Marshal Hayes did look, and what he saw was a healthy, confident young woman who stood with the poise of someone who knew her own worth. Her clothes were clean and well made, her eyes bright with intelligence and determination, her bearing that of someone who had found her place in the world, rather than someone who needed to be rescued from it. Agent Crawford, Marshal Hayes said slowly, perhaps we should consider the possibility that the situation is more complex than our orders suggest. The law is the law, Crawford insisted, but his voice lacked conviction as he stared at the circle of wolves who were watching his every movement. The law said my people had to give up their land, their way of life, their children, Kaya said, her voice carrying the weight of generations of injustice. The law said we were savages who needed to be civilized. But which is more civilized, a world that tears families apart, or one that builds them based on love and respect? Dr. Harrison chose that moment to arrive, his medical bag in hand and his expression grim. Marshal Hayes, I came as soon as I heard you were here. I hope you're not about to make the same mistake with this child that almost happened with the Sullivan girl. Dr. Harrison, Marshal Hayes nodded respectfully. We're simply following federal orders, are you? Dr. Harrison dismounted and approached Kaya, studying her with professional eyes. This child is healthier than most I see in town. She's educated, well cared for, and clearly thriving. Mr. Cross has done something remarkable here. It's not about her physical condition, Crawford protested. It's about proper placement and cultural education. Cultural education? Kaya laughed, the sound carrying no humor. You mean the education where I would be forbidden to speak my language, practice my traditions, or remember my family, where I would be taught that everything my people held sacred was wrong? Dr. Harrison examined Kaya more closely, noting the confidence in her bearing and the intelligence in her eyes. Marshal, This child has found something that most government institutions fail to provide, a family that honors both her heritage and her individual needs. She's living proof that there are better ways to help displaced children than warehousing them in schools designed to erase their identities. The standoff continued for several tense minutes, with the wolves maintaining their protective circle and Kaya standing firm between Nathan and the federal agents. Finally, Marshal Hayes made a decision that would change everything. Agent Crawford, he said formally, I'm not convinced that removing this child serves the interests of justice or her own welfare. I'm going to recommend that the Bureau review this case more thoroughly before taking any action. You can't just ignore federal law, Crawford protested. I'm not ignoring it. Marshal Hayes replied calmly, I'm exercising discretion in its enforcement, which is both my right and my responsibility as a federal marshal. As the agents prepared to leave, clearly frustrated but unwilling to force a confrontation with both the wolves and the growing number of local supporters who had arrived, Kaya felt something she had never expected to experience again: hope for a future where she could live authentically. 6 months later, that hope was realized when a federal judge ruled that Kaya's adoption by Nathan Cross was legal and binding, setting a precedent that would protect other displaced children in similar situations. The ruling specifically noted that the child's obvious health, happiness, and educational progress demonstrated that she was receiving appropriate care. The celebration at the ranch was attended by the entire community, including many who had initially been skeptical of Nathan's unusual household. Kaya wore a dress that combined Apache traditional elements with frontier practicality, and her wolves lounged peacefully in the shade while children, who had once feared them, learned to see them as the gentle guardians they truly were. Nathan said to Kaya as they watched the festivities from the porch where their story had begun, when I first left that door open, I never imagined it would lead to this. What did you imagine? Kaya asked, leaning against the man who had become her father in every way that mattered. That I might help one lost child find her way home, Nathan replied. I didn't realize that home was something we would build together. Kaya smiled, watching Stormwalker play gently with a group of children while Moonface kept watch from her favorite spot by the cabin door. My grandmother used to say that the strongest packs are the ones formed by choice rather than blood. I think she would have liked our pack. I think she would have been proud of the woman you've become, Nathan agreed. Someone who honors her heritage while creating her own path. Someone who proves that family is made not by law or blood, but by love and commitment to each other's well-being. As the sun set over their ranch, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Kaya reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had followed wolves through the wilderness, seeking family among the wild creatures who had shown her more loyalty than most humans. But in the end, she had found something even more precious: a father who saw her value, a community that accepted her unique path, and the knowledge that belonging didn't require giving up who she was, the orphaned Apache girl who had once followed wolves had found her way home at last, not to a place, but to a family that honored both her wild spirit and her human heart. Thank you for joining us on Kaya and Nathan's incredible journey from the wilderness to home. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories from the Old West. Their story proves that the strongest families are built on love, understanding, and the courage to stand up for what's right, even when the whole world says you're wrong. What other tales of chosen family and cross-cultural understanding would you like to see? Let us know in the comments below.